This is Tim Bryce with my column entitled Post Office Inefficiencies. The United States Postal Service recently announced it is going to suspend Saturday deliveries of mail. Actually, we shouldn't be too surprised, as paper-based mail has been diminishing over the years, thanks to email, electronic banking, and rising postal costs. I know many businesses who avoid the USPS as much as possible and prefer the service of other carriers instead. All of this adds up to a decline in revenues and an increase in expenses for the United States Postal Service, who is now scrambling to reorganize themselves in order to survive. One of the key lessons I preach when working with young people is everything begins with a sale. Business functions such as administration, engineering, research and development, and customer service are nice, but all employees should be cognizant of the fact that everything begins with a sale. Consequently, employees should be mindful that everything should be geared towards producing income and minimizing costs. In the case of the United States Postal Service, either the product isn't priced properly or they're running an unproductive operation. One clear indicator is the amount of profit associated with each employee. To illustrate, let's consider a commercial enterprise such as the Ford Motor Company, who in 2012 had 164,000 employees. The company had revenues of $136 billion and in expenses $128 billion, leaving an operating profit of $7.6 billion. If we divide the profit by the total number of employees, we find each employee is responsible for incurring $46,512 of the profit. Think of this as a performance measure. It's an important figure which every employee should be cognizant of, yet few companies publicize it. Let's next compare the United States Postal Service and its shipping rivals, DHL, UPS, and FedEx. First, the United States Postal Service has the most employees at 546,000. They have revenues of $65.2 billion and the highest expenses at $80.9 billion. Gives them a negative profit of $15.7 billion for this past year, meaning each employee is responsible for a negative $28,830. DHL, on the other hand, has 423,000 employees, revenues of $71 billion, and expenses of $70.6 billion. Gives them a modest operating profit of $0.476 billion. And that translates into $1,124 per employee. UPS has 398,000 employees, $54 billion in revenues, $52.7 billion in expenses, leaving them a profit of $1.34 billion. That's $3,374 per employee. But the best of them all is FedEx. FedEx has the lowest number of employees at 300,000. Their revenues were at $42.7 billion, and their expenses just $39.4 billion, leaving them a profit of $3.2 billion, and that translates into $10,686 per employee. Unbelievable. Thanks to a considerable operating loss in 2012, the United States Postal Service employees are operating in the hole. Also notice in the comparison, even though the USPS has the most employees, it has the worst profit performance. Not all of its shipping competitors top the revenues of the USPS, but all were considerably less in terms of expenses. This may be indicative of the difference between running a commercial enterprise and one operated by the government. There are actually many variables affecting a company's performance, such as economic issues, changing government regulations, and business decisions, but making each employee mindful of their individual contribution raises their consciousness as to what should be best for the company overall. Suspension of Saturday deliveries may be a good idea to reduce costs, but I suspect it is another example of a bloated government bureaucracy running amok and needs more serious cuts as opposed to minimizing service. I'm reminded of the Bryce's law. Do not try to apply a Band-Aid when a tourniquet is required to stop the bleeding. Perhaps it's time for a little enterprise engineering to flatten this government behemoth. Otherwise, the taxpayers will be asked to once again bail out this model of inefficiency. If it was a commercial enterprise, it would have likely perished by now, and its shipping competitors would have taken over, and we wouldn't be discussing the suspension of Saturday service. If the government is having this much trouble running a monopoly like the post office, imagine what they'll do with Obamacare. Friends, Keep the faith. This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida.